Jack Cooper shifted uncomfortably in his ceremonial robes, already missing his Marine Corps utilities. The fabric, some kind of alien silk, felt too smooth against his skin, almost liquid-like. Around him, the Galactic Combat Academy's great hall stretched upward in impossible angles, its crystal walls refracting the light of 3 different suns into rainbow cascades. "Remember, human," the blue-skinned protocol officer had whispered earlier, his secondary arms twitching nervously. "Bow 3 times before the Grand Master. Touch your forehead to the ground twice. And whatever you do, don't make direct eye contact with the Varthak elders. Their species considers it a death challenge." Right, Jack thought. No eye contact with the space elves. Got it. He was the only human in a sea of alien species. Most gave him a wide berth, their body language ranging from obvious disgust to barely concealed curiosity. A serpentine Sithtal student nearly tied itself in a knot trying to avoid brushing against him. The whispers followed him everywhere. Deathworlder. Probably eats raw meat. Heard they still use projectile weapons. Why is it even here? Jack clenched his jaw, but kept walking. He'd faced worse in basic. Hell, he'd faced worse in high school. But something about the aristocratic disdain in their voices set his teeth on edge. The ceremony began with a display of traditional forms. Jack watched, transfixed, as Master Keetle, a Varthak elder with silver-bark skin and flowing robes, moved through a series of positions that seemed to defy physics. The Master's movements created subtle distortions in the air, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. But more deliberate. Impressive, isn't it? A voice dripping with condescension came from his left. A young Varthak student, probably equivalent to a sophomore in human terms, was watching him with barely concealed amusement. The dance of 1,000 stars. Takes about 50 of your Earth years to master the basic form. Though I suppose. He looked Jack up and down. Your kind doesn't live that long. Several nearby students tittered. Jack felt his face grow hot, but years of discipline kept his voice steady. Seems pretty straightforward to me. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient hum of the Academy's gravity generator seemed to fade. The Varthak student's luminescent eyes widened. Straightforward. This is the most basic of our sacred forms, yet it contains movements so subtle that most species can't even perceive them, let alone replicate them. But please, his voice took on a theatrical quality, drawing more attention. Since it's so straightforward, perhaps you'd care to demonstrate. Jack knew he was being baited. The smart play would be to bow out gracefully, to apologize for his ignorance. That's what the diplomatic briefing would have suggested. But Jack Cooper hadn't joined the Marines because he was diplomatic. Sure, he said, stepping forward. Why not? The crowd parted like water. Even Master Keetle, who had finished his demonstration, turned to observe. The ancient Varthak's expression was unreadable, but there was something in his stance that suggested curiosity. Jack took his position in the center of the demonstration circle. The crystalline floor was cool beneath his bare feet. He closed his eyes for a moment, recalling every detail of the form he'd just witnessed. In that instant, something clicked. The movements weren't just beautiful, they were efficient. Strip away the ceremony and flowing robes, and this was combat distilled to its purest form. Every gesture had purpose, like field stripping a rifle or clearing a room. He opened his eyes. And then Jack Cooper, former Marine, and currently the only human in the Galactic Combat Academy, began to move. The first movement was simple, a pivot and sweep that Jack's body understood instinctively. The second followed naturally, like the recoil after firing a rifle. By the third, he wasn't thinking anymore. His muscles moved with a certainty that bypassed conscious thought. The gathered aliens' reactions shifted from amusement to confusion, then to something approaching horror. The young Varthak who had challenged him took an involuntary step backward, his luminescent eyes wide with disbelief. But it was Master Keetle's reaction that caused the room to fall completely silent. The ancient teacher's ceremonial staff slipped from his fingers, clattering against the crystal floor with a sound like breaking ice. In 900 years of teaching, he had never dropped his weapon. Jack didn't notice. He was lost in the form, his body flowing through movements that felt as natural as breathing. The subtle distortions in the air, the ones that had accompanied Ketel's demonstration, began to appear around him, but stronger, more defined. Where Ketel's had been heat waves, Jack's were more like ripples in reality itself. Impossible, someone whispered. He's accessing the energy patterns without any training. Jack completed the sequence with a final gesture that sent a visible wave of force rippling across the floor, causing the crystal surface to sing with a pure, clear note. He held the position for a moment, then straightened up, rolling his shoulders like a Marine who'd just finished his morning PT. Like I said, he shrugged, slightly out of breath. Straightforward. Then he noticed the expressions around him. The younger students had backed away to the walls. The instructors were frozen in various poses of shock or defensive stances, and Master Ketel, the ancient Varthak, was studying him with an intensity that seemed to peer right through his skull. "Tell me, human." Ketel spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "What did you feel as you moved through the form?" Jack considered the question. It felt efficient, like field stripping a weapon. Every movement had a purpose, leading to the next. Actually, he hesitated, then decided to push on. There are a few places where it could be more efficient. The gathered crowd gasped. The young Varthak who had challenged him looked like he might faint. "Show me," Ketel said quietly. Jack nodded and moved back into the starting position. "This transition here," he began, demonstrating. "If you shift your weight earlier and carry the momentum through, you can." He moved through the sequence again, but this time with subtle alterations. The air distortions appeared faster, stronger, the crystal floor humming in harmony with each step. When he finished, even Ketel's composed expression had cracked slightly. "In all my centuries," the master said, "no one has ever improved upon this form. It was considered perfect, unchangeable." He paused, studying Jack with those ancient eyes. "Until now." A younger instructor stepped forward, his voice tight with barely controlled outrage. "Master, surely you cannot entertain this mockery. He is untrained, undisciplined, a primitive from a Deathworld hoe, who has just demonstrated mastery of movements that take our finest students decades to grasp." Ketel cut him off. "And more importantly, who has shown us that perhaps our understanding of perfect was incomplete." The master walked over to Jack, moving with that impossible grace. He stopped just out of arm's reach, then did something that caused another wave of gasps. He bowed. "Welcome to the Galactic Combat Academy, Jack Cooper," Ketel said. "I believe you are about to teach us far more than we could ever teach you." And in that moment, as the implications of what he'd done began to sink in, Jack had only one thought. "Man, the guys back at Paris Island are never going to believe this." The Academy's council chamber hummed with agitated voices. 12 Varthak masters sat in their traditional floating seats, arranged in a perfect dodecahedron pattern. Jack stood at the center, feeling like he was back in front of a military review board. Except this time, the board members could probably kill him with their minds. "Preposterous." Master Sintel's voice cut through the chaos. "A human cannot simply walk in and master our sacred forms. There must be some trick, some technology we're not detecting." "Oh, shut up, Sintel." The sharp command came from Master Valsha, the youngest council member. Though young for a Varthak, still meant several centuries old. She descended from her seat, her movements precise and aggressive compared to the usual flowing grace of her species. The traditional robes couldn't hide her warrior's build. "You're all so busy being offended that you're missing the obvious." She circled Jack, her luminescent eyes narrowed in concentration. "Tell me, Marine, what exactly went through your mind when you saw the form?" Jack squared his shoulders. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." "Granted," and dropped the ma'am. I get enough formality from these fossils." Several council members bristled, but Jack caught the ghost of a smile on Keitel's face. "Honestly, it reminded me of CQC training, close quarters combat," he clarified for the aliens. "Every movement has to flow into the next because if you hesitate, you're dead. Your body has to react faster than your brain can think." Valsha's eyes lit up. "Exactly. Computer, display comparative neural mapping." A hologram blazed to life in the center of the chamber, showing two brain scans side by side. Left is a Varthak master during form execution. Right is our human friend during his demonstration. The council leaned forward. The scans were dramatically different. The Varthaks showed careful, deliberate patterns, like a precisely tuned machine. Jack's looked like a fireworks display. "We've been teaching these forms wrong for millennia," Valsha continued, her voice rising with excitement. "We thought the precise movements were needed to access the energy patterns. But look at his neural pathways. They're creating new connections in real time, adapting and evolving with each movement." "But that's impossible," another master protested. "The forms require exact precision, developed over centuries off." "On your worlds, yes," Valsha cut in. "But Earth, high gravity, multiple predator species, constant environmental threats. Humans didn't have centuries to perfect their movements. They had to adapt instantly or die. Their brains evolved to process and replicate complex physical patterns at incredible speeds." She turned to Jack. "Tell me, when you suggested improvements to the form, how did you know they would work?" Jack shrugged. "Just felt right. Like when you're in combat, and you have to improvise. Your body knows things your mind hasn't figured out yet. Muscle memory," Valsha breathed. "A survival trait so fundamental to their species that they take it for granted. What we achieve through centuries of meditation, they do through pure instinct." The chamber erupted in argument again, but Keitel raised his hand for silence. "There is one way to test this theory." He fixed Jack with those ancient eyes. "The Temple of Echoes. If Master Valsha is correct about the human's neural adaptability, he should be able to." He trailed off as several council members shouted protests. "The temple is forbidden to outsiders. He'll be killed instantly. The energies would tear his mind apart." But Valsha was grinning. "Unless his brain adapts to them, just like it adapted to the forms. What do you say, Cooper? Ready to make history, or get turned into a quantum smear trying?" Jack remembered his old drill instructor's favorite phrase. "Marines make the impossible possible." He straightened up and gave Valsha his best devil dog smile. "When do we start?" The Temple of Echoes lived up to its name. Even Jack's breathing seemed to reverberate through the ancient structure, coming back with harmonics that made his teeth ache. The walls were black crystal, seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating an infinite depth that made him dizzy if he looked too long. "The temple amplifies psychic resonance," Valsha explained, her voice unusually quiet. "It's where the first Varthak masters discovered how to manipulate energy through movement. Most species can't even enter without years of mental preparation. The raw psychic feedback." She glanced at him. "Well, let's just say it's usually messy." "Comforting," Jack muttered. "Any other good news?" "The last non-Varthak who tried this liquefied his bones." She paused. "But his species evolved on a low-gravity world, so you should be fine. Your pep talks need work, Val." They reached the center chamber, a perfect sphere of the same light-drinking crystal. Ancient sigils carved into the walls pulsed with a faint purple luminescence. The air felt thick, like moving through invisible Sarah. "Begin with the first form," Valsha instructed, taking up a position near the chamber's only exit. "And Jack, try not to explode." "Yeah, thanks for." Jack stopped mid-sentence as he took the starting stance. Something was different. The air around his hands seemed to bend, like he was seeing heat waves underwater. But it wasn't just visual, he could feel it. He moved into the first sequence, and the world changed. The temple's crystal walls began to sing, a deep harmonic that he felt in his bones. Each movement left trails of purple light in the air, like luminous contrails. But more than that, he could suddenly see how the movements affected everything. Reality itself seemed to flex and ripple around him. He could see, no, feel, how each gesture created patterns in some underlying field of energy. It was like suddenly gaining a new sense, like a blind man seeing color for the first time. Incredible, Valsha whispered. You're not just replicating the forms, you're actually manipulating the quantum field. But how are you handling the psychic feedback? Jack was about to answer when he felt it. A surge of information, like a tidal wave crashing into his mind. Centuries of accumulated knowledge, techniques, and power stored in the temple's crystalline matrix, all trying to pour into his brain at once. His knees buckled. Warning bells screamed in his head, like every survival instinct firing at once. But instead of fighting it, he did what Marines did best. He adapted. His brain, evolved to process threat responses in milliseconds, began categorizing and filtering the flood of information. Combat instincts kicked in, treating the psychic download like environmental awareness in a firefight, taking in everything, but focusing only on what was immediately useful. Jack. Valsha's voice seemed to come from very far away. Your nose is bleeding. He barely heard her. He was too busy watching his own thoughts create ripples in reality. On instinct, he shifted his stance and pushed, not with his muscles, but with something deeper. A wave of force exploded outward, causing the crystal walls to ring like massive bells. Valsha was thrown back against the doorway, catching herself with practiced grace. By the first masters, she breathed. That was a master-level energy manipulation. It should have taken decades to. She stopped, staring at him. Your eyes. Jack blinked, trying to clear his vision. Everything looked sharper, like he could see the edges of reality itself. So, he managed, wiping blood from his nose with his sleeve. I'm guessing this isn't normal for first-time students. Valsha's reply was cut off by a new sound, alarm crystals screaming to life throughout the temple. Her expression shifted from wonder to concern. The purists must have detected the energy surge. She grabbed his arm. We need to move. Now. Why? Because, she said, already pulling him toward a hidden passage. They're coming to kill you. Great, Jack thought as they ran. Just like every other school I've been to. Just once, Jack panted as they sprinted through crystalline corridors. I'd like to join a school where people don't try to kill me. You've had this problem before. Valsha moved like liquid shadow, her feet barely touching the ground. High school football. Very competitive. They skidded to a halt as purple energy blasts scorched the wall ahead. 3 Varthak warriors materialized from the shadows, their traditional robes replaced with form-fitting combat suits. Their eyes blazed with psychic power. The human dies. The lead purist announced. This is your only warning, Master Valsha. Jack dropped into a combat stance, then nearly stumbled as his new senses kicked in. He could see the energy building in his opponent's bodies, could track the quantum fluctuations that preceded their movements. It was like having a heads-up display in his brain. Any advice? He whispered to Valsha. Don't die, she offered, taking up a position beside him. They're purist zealots. They'd spent centuries perfecting their combat forms. Cool. Jack grinned, feeling that familiar combat clarity settling in. So they're predictable. He moved before the first purist finished his attack gesture. Marine combat training merged with his new awareness in ways his opponents couldn't have predicted. Where they expected ceremonial forms, they got a Deathworlder's savage efficiency. The first purist launched a psychic strike that should have turned Jack's nervous system to jelly. Instead, Jack's combat-evolved brain processed the attack like incoming fire, instinctively creating countermeasures. He closed the distance as the purist stood shocked, then introduced the alien's face to a very primitive, very effective right hook. Impossible. The second purist's attack pattern was beautiful, perfect, and telegraphed so clearly that Jack's new senses picked it apart before it began. Jack's counter wasn't elegant. It was a classic Marine Corps leg sweep, followed by an elbow strike that would have made his combat instructor proud. Valsha engaged the third, their movements a blur of traditional forms. But Jack couldn't focus on their fight. His new awareness was picking up more threats converging on their position. "We've got company," he shouted, just as the temple's crystalline walls began to hum with power. "Lots of company." "The emergency passage is sealed," Valsha called back, dispatching her opponent with a move that bent light itself. "We need another way out." Jack's mind raced, processing input from both his combat instincts and his new psychic awareness. The wall's resonance, the energy patterns, the structural weaknesses. "I have a really bad idea," he said. "Those are the best kind." Jack reached out with his newly awakened abilities, feeling for the temple's energy matrix. It was like trying to redirect a river with his bare hands, but that's what Marines specialized in, doing the impossible. Hit the deck. He pulled on the energy, not with centuries of trained precision, but with raw human adaptability. The temple's harmonic resonance changed, crystal walls screaming in protest. Cracks appeared in reality itself. The ceiling exploded upward just as dozens of purist warriors breached the corridor. Crystalline shards rained down as Jack grabbed Valsha and jumped, not for the new opening, but through one of the cracks in space he created. They emerged on the temple's exterior, 3 stories up and falling fast. Jack reached out again, desperately trying to remember the levitation techniques he'd glimpsed in the psychic download. Their fall slowed, then stopped completely 2 feet above the ground. They hung there for a moment before dropping unceremoniously onto the grass. "That," Valsha said, picking herself up, "was not in any training manual I've ever seen." "Yeah, well," Jack stood, wincing. "Sometimes you have to improvise. You created a quantum tunneling effect through pure instinct." She stared at him. "Do you have any idea how impossible that is?" The temple behind them was still crackling with energy, and distant shouts suggested the purists weren't done yet. "Can we discuss impossible things later?" Jack suggested. "Pretty sure we just kicked a hornet's nest of homicidal space monks." Valsha's laugh was surprisingly human. "Welcome to advanced placement, Marine." They ran as the night lit up with purple fire behind them, and Jack wondered if it was too late to transfer to a nice, safe combat zone instead. Again, Valsha's command echoed through the hidden training chamber deep beneath the academy. And this time, try not to tear a hole in space-time. Jack, sweat-soaked and breathing hard, reset his stance. They'd been at this for 6 hours straight, but his body seemed to crave the intensity. It reminded him of Hell Week in Basic, except this time, he was bending reality instead of just his muscles. "You know," he grunted, executing a complex sequence that left aurora-like trails in the air. "Most teachers start with basics before moving to the don't break the universe stuff. Most students take centuries to reach this point." Valsha circled him, making minute adjustments to his form. "You're processing decades of techniques daily. We don't have the luxury of taking it slow." She wasn't exaggerating. Since the temple incident 3 days ago, Jack's abilities had been growing exponentially. What started as simple energy manipulation had evolved into something that made the senior masters nervous. His human brain wasn't just learning the techniques, it was optimizing them, finding shortcuts and combinations that shouldn't have been possible. "Your species," Valsha continued, "evolved to process complex physical patterns instantly. A predator's attack, a change in terrain, environmental threats. Your brains had to adapt or die. Now you're applying that same ability to quantum-level manipulation of reality itself." Jack completed the sequence with a move that briefly bent light around him. "You make it sound so simple." "Simple," she laughed. "You're doing things that go against 10,000 years of established doctrine. The purists aren't just afraid of you learning our arts. They're afraid of how you're changing them. A sharp crack interrupted them as a practice drone shattered, caught in the backwash of Jack's energy field. Third one today. Speaking of changing things, he said, watching the drone's pieces float in suspended animation before clattering to the ground. I've been thinking about that last combat form you showed me. Valsha's eyes narrowed. The spiral of eternal grace. It's considered perfect, unchanged for 5,000 years. Yeah, but what if you took the third sequence and combined it with a Marine Corps armbar? The energy flow would actually intensify if you... He demonstrated, his movements a blur of ancient art and military efficiency. The air around him crystallized momentarily, forming patterns that shouldn't have existed in normal space. Valsha's jaw dropped. That's, she started. Horrible, Jack suggested. Sacrilegious. Beautiful. She moved closer, studying the lingering energy patterns. You're not just learning our techniques, you're evolving them, making them more efficient, more practical. Pretty sure that's heresy. It's survival. She met his eyes. Your species didn't become apex predators by keeping things the same. You adapted, improved, evolved. Now you're doing the same thing to arts that we thought were immutable. An alarm crystal pulsed on her wrist. Her expression hardened. The purists are making their move. The council is meeting in an hour to vote on removing all non-Verithac students from the advanced programs. Jack wiped sweat from his forehead. Let me guess, starting with the troublemaking human. They're afraid, Jack. In less than a week, you've mastered techniques that took our greatest teachers' lifetimes to perfect. And worse, you're improving them. So what's the play? Valsha's smile turned predatory. The council meetings are open to all masters. Any student who can demonstrate master-level proficiency has the right to attend and to challenge the council's decisions. And what qualifies as master level? She gestured to the crystallized air patterns still hovering around them. That would do it. Think you're ready to show the council how a human evolves their perfect, unchanging arts. Jack thought about all the times humans had been told something was impossible, perfect, unchangeable. Then he thought about how many times they'd proved those assumptions wrong. He dropped into a ready stance, feeling energy curl around his fingers. Time to crash their party. The Grand Council chamber was an architectural impossibility. A dome of pure energy contained within interlocking fields of force, suspended above the Academy's highest spire. As Jack entered with Valsha, the gathered masters' collective psychic pressure hit him like a physical wave. Remember, Valsha whispered, you have the right to challenge, but they have the right to choose the form of demonstration. Great. No pressure. Jack straightened his ceremonial robes, black with silver trim, marking him as a challenge candidate, just several thousand years of tradition to overturn. The chamber was packed. Beyond the council members in their floating seats, hundreds of students and teachers crowded the observation rings. Jack spotted more than a few unauthorized recording crystals. Apparently, everyone wanted to see the Deathworlder either triumph or get vaporized. Supreme Master Ventil, head of the Purist faction, rose from his seat. His energy field rippled with barely contained disdain. The council recognizes the challenge. His pause before the last word dripped with contempt. Though how a human presumes to have mastered our sacred arts in mere days. I don't presume anything, Jack interrupted, causing several masters to inhale sharply. I'm here to demonstrate evolution. He moved to the center of the chamber, feeling every eye on him. His new senses picked up the energy pattern swirling around him. Fear, anger, curiosity, and underneath it all, a current of excitement from the younger students. Evolution. Ventil's laugh was cold. Our arts are perfect, unchanged for millennia. What could a primitive species possibly? Jack dropped into the first stance of the spiral of eternal grace. The chamber went silent as energy began to coalesce around him. But instead of following the traditional form, he seamlessly integrated the modifications he'd developed with Valsha. The results were immediate and dramatic. Where the traditional form created subtle distortions in reality, Jack's version carved visible patterns in the air. Each movement flowed with lethal efficiency, combining the precision of ancient techniques with the raw adaptability of human combat evolution. Impossible. Ventol's voice shook. The forms cannot be improved. Jack maintained the flow, adding elements of marine hand-to-hand combat that amplified the energy patterns. That's your problem. You've spent so long perfecting these forms that you've forgotten why they were created in the first place. He shifted into a new sequence, one of his own design. The chamber's energy field responded, creating harmonics that made the very air sing. They're not meant to be perfect. They're meant to be effective. Each movement now was a fusion of old and new, east and west, tradition and innovation. Humans don't believe in perfect. We believe in better. The energy patterns around him had become so intense that they were visible to even non-sensitive observers. Students gasped as reality itself seemed to flex and bend to his will. Your sacred arts aren't meant to be preserved in amber. They're meant to grow, to adapt. Jack completed the sequence with a move that combined a Marine Corps takedown with quantum field manipulation. The resulting energy cascade temporarily transformed the chamber's atmosphere into crystalline lattices of pure force. When the light show faded, even Ventol was speechless. Master Keetle rose from his seat, his ancient eyes gleaming. In all my centuries, I have never seen such perfection through imperfection. You have taken our unchanging forms and shown us that change itself is the highest form of mastery. This is heresy. Ventol began, but Keetle silenced him with a gesture. No, this is evolution. We have been so focused on preserving our arts that we forgot their true purpose, to grow, to adapt, to become more than they were. He descended to the chamber floor, and to everyone's shock, bowed to Jack. The council recognizes not just your mastery, Jack Cooper, but your contribution to our arts. The motion to restrict training is denied. His eyes twinkled. Instead, I moved to establish a new division of study, adaptive combat evolution. The chamber erupted in chaos. Cheers from the students, protests from the traditionalists, and through it all, Valcha's knowing smile. Congratulations, she whispered. You just started a revolution. Jack adjusted his robes with a grin. Just another day at school. 3 months after the Grand Council challenge, Jack stood before his first class in the newly christened Adaptive Combat Evolution Division. The training hall, crystalline walls now reinforced with energy-absorbing fields, was packed with students from 50 different species. Welcome to ACE training, he began, deliberately using the human military acronym. I'm not going to call myself Master Cooper because, frankly, that's weird. Call me Coach. A Xithtal student raised 3 of their appendages. Is it true you mastered centuries of techniques in days? No. Jack smiled at their confused expressions. I didn't master them. I evolved them. And that's what you're all here to learn. He paced the training floor, energy rippling subtly around him. The Varthak arts aren't perfect. Nothing is. But that's their strength, not their weakness. Every species in this room has different abilities, different evolutionary advantages. Why should we all train the same way? A holographic training drone materialized, and Jack demonstrated a basic form. The air shimmered with familiar patterns. This is the traditional form of rising moons, he explained. Beautiful, precise, and if you're a methane-breathing Krellix with 6 legs, completely useless. The Krellix student in question wiggled their sensory stalks in agreement. So let's break it down. Jack shifted stance. The form is about energy redirection. The specific movements don't matter. What matters is understanding the principle. Each of you will develop your own way to achieve the same result. He nodded to his assistant instructor. Valcha stepped forward, now wearing the black and silver robes of the AC division. Show them, Val. They moved through the same form simultaneously. Valcha with the traditional Varthak grace, Jack with his hybrid human style. The energy patterns were identical, though achieved through dramatically different movements. Same destination, Jack said, "Different paths. That's what ACE is about." A nervous-looking Varthak student spoke up. "But the traditional forms are sacred, and they still exist. We're not replacing them. We're building on them, adding to them." Jack gestured to the class. "Look around. Every species here evolved different solutions to survival. Imagine what we can learn from each other." Valsha took over. "The Varthak spent millennia perfecting our arts in isolation. But the galaxy is vast, and no single tradition holds all the answers." "Exactly." Jack summoned another training drone. "The Helios sequence, for example. Traditionally, it requires precise finger positions that half of you don't have fingers for. But a Zenthurian's bioelectric field can achieve the same effect. A Krelix's methane expulsion can create similar energy patterns. A human's adaptive muscle memory can." The drone exploded in a shower of sparks. "Occasionally break things," he finished with a sheepish grin. "We're still working on power regulation." Laughter rippled through the class, breaking the last of the tension. "That's what we're here to do," Jack continued. "Break things, fix them, make them better. Not just the forms, but our understanding of what's possible." He looked at his students, former enemies and rivals now united in pursuit of something new. The purists had withdrawn their opposition after several of their own younger members defected to the AC division. Even Supreme Master Vental had grudgingly admitted that change was, perhaps, not entirely heretical. "One last thing," Jack said. "Someone once told me that humans don't live long enough to master these arts the traditional way. They were right. But that's exactly why we succeed." He created a complex energy pattern in the air, a blend of quantum manipulation and good old-fashioned Marine Corps efficiency. "We don't have centuries to get it perfect. We adapt. We evolve. We find new ways. And now we're going to teach each other how to do the impossible." Valsha stepped forward, ready to begin. 50 students of 50 species dropped into 50 unique ready stances. Jack grinned. "Let's evolve."